What happens when one of the most respected figures in Hollywood appears for what should be a simple interview, only to face nearly half a minute of open disrespect that shifts everything? It took just one condescending remark from Joy Behar to spark a confrontation so intense that producers had no choice but to end the live broadcast. Before we dig into this unbelievable exchange, be sure to hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments about what you're about to hear. That morning, Samuel L. Jackson walked onto The View expecting a routine conversation to promote his new film. The plan was simple: no controversy, no politics, just a veteran actor discussing his work. But clearly, Joy Behar had something else in mind. At first, the interview went as expected. The other hosts welcomed Jackson warmly and asked standard questions about his long-standing career and upcoming projects. Jackson, ever the consummate professional, answered thoughtfully, sharing meaningful insights about his life in Hollywood. The audience was entertained, laughing at his stories, clearly enjoying his energy. Then Joy Behar stepped in. "You know, Samuel," she began with that well-known smirk, "I've always been curious about actors like you." Jackson raised an eyebrow, picking up on something strange in her tone. "What do you mean, Joy?" he asked. "Well," she continued, "you've built a career around these tough guy roles, these angry characters. Do you ever worry that you're just feeding into harmful stereotypes?" The studio fell into a hush. The other host shifted awkwardly. Jackson's expression stayed calm, but a flicker of emotion crossed his face. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice still steady, but with an edge. Behar carried on, unaware or unconcerned with the growing tension. "Let's be real. You often play these intimidating characters. Angry men with weapons. Shouting and swearing. Don't you think that sends the wrong message?" Jackson leaned back, clearly processing her words. "Are you seriously asking me this right now?" he replied. But Behar didn't stop. Her tone turned more patronizing. "Maybe you should consider choosing more uplifting roles. Something more positive, more inspiring." Jackson repeated her words, his voice rising slightly. "More inspirational?" Then came his pointed reply. "Do you even understand what you're saying?" The other host tried to interrupt, sensing the conversation going south. "Maybe we should move on," one began. But Behar pushed ahead. "No, I think this is a valuable discussion. Samuel, you hold influence. You've got power in Hollywood. Why not use that power to show more positive images instead of all the violence and rage?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "So now you're going to lecture me on the roles I should take?" Behar quickly responded, sharper now. "I'm not lecturing. I'm just asking real questions. You can't deny that many of your roles are problematic." "Problematic?" Jackson repeated, his tone now unmistakably sharp, familiar to anyone who's followed his work. "You really think my roles are problematic?" The tension on set was now impossible to ignore. Offstage producers were giving nervous signals to the camera crew. The other host sat frozen, hardly breathing. Still, Behar seemed to be enjoying the back and forth. "Representation matters," she added. "When young people always see you as the aggressive guy, what kind of example does that set?" Jackson leaned in, locking eyes with Behar. "So what, I should only take roles that make you feel good?" "That's not what I said," Behar answered, though her tone betrayed some defensiveness. "No, that's exactly what you said," Jackson snapped. "You want me to play friendly, harmless characters who don't challenge anyone or make them uncomfortable. I just want you to be more responsible." Behar pressed, her voice louder now. "You've got a platform. Use it better." Those words sat heavy in the air. Jackson stared at her for a moment, clearly weighing his next move. "Responsible?" he repeated softly, voice low and sharp. "You really want to talk about responsibility?" "Yes," Behar replied confidently, completely missing the growing discomfort in the room. "I think actors should think about the impact of their roles. Jackson nodded slowly. Okay. Let's talk about responsibility. He turned fully toward her now, giving her his full focus. You want to know what's truly irresponsible, Joy? Sitting on national television and reducing everything I've done in a 30-year career to a stereotype. Behar tried to jump in, but Jackson raised a hand. No. You had your say. Now it's my turn. The entire studio fell silent. Even the audience seemed to recognize this wasn't just a heated moment. This was something much bigger. You want to ask about my work? About my choices? Jackson said, his voice rising. I've played fathers, teachers, mentors, heroes, real people with layers and depth. But all you see is what? Some angry black man holding a gun? Behar's confident smile started to fade. I never said anything about race, she stammered. You didn't have to. Jackson shot back. Your meaning was clear enough. The other hosts were now desperate to intervene, but it was too late. Jackson and Behar were locked into a confrontation neither seemed ready to back away from. Behar, trying to regain control of the conversation, said, I think you're being overly sensitive. But the moment those words left her mouth, something shifted in Jackson's face. It was like a switch had been flipped. Overly sensitive? He repeated, his voice dropping into that signature low, dangerous tone that made his film characters unforgettable. Did you really just call me that? The temperature on the set felt like it dropped instantly. Everyone present sensed they were watching something historic unfold. I'm just saying maybe you're reading too much into what I said, Behar offered, her voice losing its earlier edge. But Jackson wasn't letting go. He leaned in closer, locking eyes with her. No, Joy. You don't get to backtrack now. You questioned my choices, my intelligence, and now you're trying to say I'm just being too sensitive. One of the co-hosts made a desperate attempt to jump in. Maybe we're getting off track here, she said. But Jackson refused to let the moment pass. No, he snapped. We're finally hitting the real issue. Joy thinks she can sit behind this desk and lecture me about how I should live and work. Behar clenched her jaw, clearly not enjoying being called out in front of everyone. I have every right to ask questions, she insisted. That's our job here. Jackson let out a short, humorless laugh. Questions? That wasn't questioning. That was you putting me in a box. Turning me into some kind of problem that needs correcting. I never said you were a problem, Behar retorted. You didn't have to, Jackson said. Your tone, your attitude, your smug little smirks, from the second I sat down, you treated me like I needed fixing. At this point, the other hosts were frantically signaling off camera for the producers to intervene. It was clear this wasn't a typical heated debate, it had gotten deeply personal. Still, in a decision that would prove disastrous, Behar chose to double down. I think you're overreacting, she said, using that same dismissive tone once again. All I did was ask some basic questions about your career. Jackson's eyes widened. Overreacting? Basic questions? He slowly stood up from his seat, and the tension skyrocketed. Everyone in the studio was on edge. Let me explain something to you about your simple questions, Joy. When you sit here and imply that my career has done harm, that's not a simple question. When you suggest I've been irresponsible in my work, that's not basic. Behar stayed seated now, but her body language had changed. She was no longer leaning in, no longer aggressive. She leaned back, clearly realizing that things had escalated beyond what she could manage. Jackson continued, his voice rising to that commanding level he's famous for. You want to talk about what's irresponsible? Sitting here, in front of millions of people, and making assumptions about who I am based on the roles I've played. That's irresponsible. I wasn't making assumptions, Behar said, though her voice had grown noticeably weaker. Yes, you were. Jackson fired back. You looked at me and saw nothing but the characters I play. You didn't see the man who's been married to the same woman for over 40 years. You didn't see the man who's mentored countless young actors in this business. You didn't see the man who's given millions to causes that matter and worked to make real change. The room was absolutely silent. Even the crew had stopped moving. Jackson's voice lowered, filled with emotion now. All you saw was what you wanted to see. A stereotype you thought needed correcting. Behar opened her mouth to reply, but Jackson pressed on. And the saddest part? You think you're helping. You really believe you're doing something positive by telling me how I should express myself as an artist. That's not true, Behar said. But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Isn't it? Jackson challenged. You want me to take safer roles. Friendlier roles. Ones that fit your comfort zone. That don't challenge your worldview. That don't ask you to think too hard about real issues. He began to move slowly across the set, hands gesturing with each word. Do you know how offensive it is to hear someone say your life's work is wrong, just because it doesn't match what they think art should look like? The other hosts had given up trying to interject. At this point, even they were completely absorbed in what Jackson was saying. I've spent 30 years in this industry, Jackson said, turning again to face Behar head-on. 3 decades choosing roles that challenge me. Roles that tell stories that matter. And you think you can dismiss all of that as problematic? Behar looked visibly uncomfortable now, fidgeting in her seat, eyes darting toward the crew. I think you're taking this too personally, she said. Jackson's reaction was immediate. Too personally? Joy, my career is personal. My art is personal. When you attack that, you attack me. I wasn't attacking, she muttered. But even she seemed unsure. Yes, you were, Jackson said with certainty. And what makes it worse is you don't even realize it. You're so comfortable in your own position, in your privilege, that you don't see how disrespectful you've been. That word, privilege, seemed to set something off in Behar. She straightened up. Privilege? What privilege? She snapped. Jackson looked at her, astonished. The privilege of sitting there thinking you can pass judgment on other people's lives. The privilege of believing that your opinion about my work matters more than the decades I've spent building my career. I have a right to my opinion, Behar insisted, her voice sharper now. Jackson nodded. You absolutely do. But you don't have the right to be disrespectful. You don't have the right to reduce everything I've done to a stereotype. And you certainly don't have the right to sit there and talk to me about responsibility when you don't even understand what that means in my world. The argument had reached a boiling point. Both Jackson and Behar were locked in, either willing to step back. Emotions ran high, and it was clear this was more than just a disagreement. This was a collision of values. Behar's face was flushed, caught between anger and embarrassment. She hadn't anticipated this level of pushback, and Jackson's intensity was overwhelming. You know what? Behar snapped, her voice hardening. Maybe the issue isn't your roles. Maybe the issue is your attitude. The air grew heavy. Jackson froze, stunned, staring at her with disbelief. My attitude? He repeated, each word slow and deliberate, his voice dangerously calm. Yes, your attitude, Behar said again, completely unaware that she had just walked straight into disaster. You come in here acting like you're above criticism. Like no one has the right to question anything you do. Jackson's hands clenched slightly at his sides. You think I have an attitude problem? I think you have a problem with authority. Behar fired back, now openly angry. You don't like being challenged by someone who doesn't fawn over you. The hosts were frantically signaling behind the scenes for a break, anything to stop what was clearly spiraling out of control. But it was too late. Jackson let out a short laugh. Not the kind that brings relief, the kind that comes before something serious. Authority? He repeated. You think you represent authority here? I represent the audience, Behar snapped back. I ask the questions that people want answers to. Jackson's expression turned cold. No, Joy, he said sharply. You represent everything that's wrong with this business. You represent the arrogance that believes tearing other people down somehow makes you more important. Behar's jaw dropped. She hadn't expected this level of direct attack. How dare you? She gasped. I've worked in this industry for decades. I've earned my place at this table. Have you? Jackson asked, tilting his head, eyes locked on her. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you earned your spot by stirring controversy, not by being genuinely good at what you do. That hit deep. Behar's face turned red with fury. You arrogant piece of work! Who do you think you are? She shouted. Jackson stayed calm, his tone icy. I know exactly who I am. I'm someone who earned respect through talent, hard work, and dedication, not by running my mouth and tearing people apart for ratings. That was the final blow. Behar leapt from her seat, pointing a finger at Jackson. You think you're better than everyone else, she screamed. You think just because you're a movie star, you can come in here and disrespect me on my show? Jackson didn't flinch. Your show? He said flatly. I thought this was The View, not the Joy Behar Hour. The other hosts winced. That line cut deep. It struck right at Behar's habit of trying to dominate every segment. This is my workplace, she shouted, her voice now shaky with rage. And I don't have to sit here and take this abuse from some washed-up actor who thinks he's too good for real questions. The studio gasped. Even for someone as bold as Behar, calling Samuel L. Jackson a has-been was way out of line. Jackson didn't react at first. But when he finally spoke, it was in that quiet, deadly tone that commands attention. Has-been? He said slowly. Did you just call me a has-been? Behar instantly knew she'd gone too far, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. If the shoe fits, she muttered. Jackson nodded slowly, taking it in. Then he turned to the camera, speaking directly to the viewers at home. Ladies and gentlemen, he said calmly, you just witnessed something powerful. You saw someone expose their true character live on television. He turned back to Behar, who now stood behind her chair like it was some kind of shield. You want to call me a has-been? Fine. Let's talk about careers. Let's talk about legacy. I've made over 150 films. I've worked with every respected director in this industry. I've brought life to characters with meaning, with depth, for more than 30 years. His voice began to rise, that unmistakable commanding tone taking over the room. And what have you done, Joy? What's your legacy? Sitting at a desk tearing down the people who actually create something? Who actually contribute to culture? Behar tried to interrupt, but Jackson was in full stride now. You want to talk about responsibility? About the message I send? He stepped forward, his voice booming now. What message do you send, Joy? What do you contribute besides negativity and division? Behind the scenes, producers were desperately trying to cut to commercial. But Jackson wasn't finished. I came here today to share my work, to offer something positive to your audience. But instead, I walked into a lecture from someone who thinks stirring the pot is the same as being relevant. He moved toward the edge of the stage, clearly preparing to leave. You know what's really sad, Joy? He said, pausing for a moment. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's lived a full life, who had something meaningful to share. But you were too caught up in trying to score points to actually listen. In a last-ditch attempt, Behar called after him. Samuel, wait. Maybe we just got off on the wrong foot. Let's start over. Jackson turned, giving her a look of pure disdain. Start over? He repeated. Lady, there's no coming back from what just happened here. You revealed exactly who you are. Then he turned once more to the main camera. To everyone watching at home, remember this. This is what happens when ego gets in the way of simple human decency. And remember, respect is something you earn, not something you demand. With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the stage of The View, leaving behind a stunned studio, and what would become one of the most unforgettable moments in live television history. The camera stayed focused on Joy Behar's stunned face as silence filled the studio. A moment later, the show finally, and mercifully, cut to commercial. But though the confrontation was technically over, the impact of what had just occurred would echo long after the cameras stopped rolling. In under 30 minutes, millions of viewers had witnessed the complete breakdown of a talk show's polished image and the destruction of one host's credibility, all delivered by one of the most respected actors in the business. It wasn't just drama. It was a master class in how to deal with public disrespect, not with shouting or insults, but with intelligence, poise, and an unshakable sense of self. Jackson hadn't just defended himself. He had laid out a full and forceful argument, exposing double standards and cutting through shallow criticism with facts, experience, and undeniable presence. This wasn't just an uncomfortable TV moment. It was something far more powerful. Viewers saw the danger of hiding behind friendly talk show setups while pushing passive-aggressive judgment. They saw what it looks like when someone refuses to be boxed in by narrow expectations or treated like a target simply for speaking truth through their art. In those final few moments, Jackson didn't just protect his legacy, he expanded it. He reminded everyone watching that artists aren't here to be comfortable or convenient. They're here to reflect real life, even when it's hard to hear. And when someone like Joy Behar tries to reduce a man's life's work to a stereotype or a talking point, they're not encouraging dialogue, they're shutting it down. And that's what made this moment unforgettable. It wasn't just about Samuel L. Jackson standing up for himself. It was about challenging a pattern, the way certain voices are questioned more, the way some are told to soften their message while others are praised for speaking freely. Jackson flipped that script on live television, and in doing so, he didn't just win an argument. He made a statement, one that will be remembered for years. Whether you agreed with him or not, you had to respect the way he carried himself. With every word, he showed that dignity doesn't mean silence, and strength doesn't mean staying quiet when you're disrespected. It means standing firm, knowing who you are, and speaking with purpose. In the end, Jackson walked off the View stage not defeated but triumphant, having delivered a lesson in character, clarity, and class that no one watching would soon forget.